Welcome back. Today we're going to build, sheathe, and raise a 24-foot long and a 12.5-foot tall wall with wall jacks. It's my first time using wall jacks, so let's see how this goes. Because of the design of the house, this was the first wall that made sense to try to build in full and raise as one complete wall. The other side of the house, every wall was just very different, and if you've been following, you know that there's some tall rake walls and stuff that aren't as conducive to being raised with wall jacks. I could have raised the very first wall that we did with wall jacks. I didn't have wall jacks at the time, and quite frankly, because this is the first time I'm building a house, building in a more conventional way, initially just gave me that little bit more of experience to feel confident about going up to the next level for this wall. But as is often the case, it seems, I find a way to sort of test the limits of the tools I'm working with. In this case, the wall jacks are rated for 1,000 pounds each, and I'll have two to raise this wall. But they're also only rated to raise a wall that's up to 9.5 feet tall, but this wall is 12.5 feet, so we will have to make some adjustments for how we use the wall jacks. While this is a fairly large wall from a square footage perspective, there's only two windows in it. There's a small bathroom window and then a hall window, so most of the wall is going to be studs. This is the big advantage of jacking the walls up and building them on the ground, is just being able to sheathe the wall on the ground and not have to do it once the walls are vertical. So here I'm using the zip system, so it's just a 1/2 inch sheets of this sheathing with a coated barrier, and we'll end up taping it. Here I'm running a string line. You shouldn't have to do this because the markings are pretty good on most of these, but this batch was off and the printing you can see is misaligned. So I just ran snap lines on all the studs just to make sure I was hitting them rather than trusting the printing on the sheathing itself. Here I'm using the pass load gas nailer with 2 3/4 inch ring shanked sheathing nails. That pass load gas nailer has really been a lifesaver on this site since I don't have power. It's not perfect by any stretch, but it certainly does the job, and it's taken some expected and unexpected abuse on the job site and it still performs pretty well. The gas canisters do start to get expensive after a while, but it's going to be cheaper than me buying a larger air compressor and a pneumatic powered nailer in the long run. One important thing to point out is that once you sheathe this wall on the ground, it's not going to move once it's up. So you really need to make sure that the wall is square on the deck. The way that I do that is just the 3-4-5 method. So you take a corner of the wall, measure 3 feet out on that same adjacent corner, measure 4 feet out on the other side, and then try to get 5 feet, 5 feet triangle, a right triangle to make sure the wall is square. I do that on opposing corners just to make sure, especially in a larger wall like this, that there isn't any drift. Because like I said, once you nail this sheathing to the wall, once you get it up, there's just not going to be any room to move it around. So it's important to make sure that it's as square as it can be while it's on the deck. Here I'm just routing around all the edges to make sure that the edges are clean, and then we'll start to raise the wall. So this is the wall jack. I don't know how many different kinds there are, but this is the only kind I could really find. They're made from a few different manufacturers, but they all seem to be pretty much exactly the same thing. First thing I'm going to do is put braces on the outside of the wall, because as the wall raises, it's going to want to scoot, and you don't want it to scoot off the edge of the building, obviously, but you also kind of want it to land exactly where you want it to land. And so if you put that blocking in place, as the wall gets straighter and straighter, it will just kind of plop into that location. You might have to make some adjustments, which I did on the bottom plate once it is fully up, but those braces are incredibly important. You should use your nail patterns on the top plate as a guide, because you want each of these wall jacks to slip in between a stud bay, because there's a bar on the inside edge of that wall jack that'll catch a stud if it's on a stud line, so you really want to make sure it's in between studs. You also want to put a bracing block behind the 2x4 that the wall jack is riding so that it doesn't slip. I suggest putting it long ways. I did it both long ways and short ways, I guess. But the problem is it's hard to tell if that vertical 2x4 is remaining vertical as the wall is going up. The problem can be if that wall jack isn't completely perpendicular to the 2x4, it can jam up, it can bind, and so you might need to just continually adjust the position of those 2x4s that the wall jacks are riding on to keep the wall jack itself from binding. Once I got the wall off the deck, I didn't have too many concerns about the wall falling or anything, but I do want to be extra safe, so I will start to put bracing in here, as you can see right there. And it's just there to keep the wall from crashing down quickly. I ended up screwing a couple of the braces to the wall, and so they would slide with the wall there on the left. And there are some sort of ladder blocks that will catch the wall a little bit. Again, it's not perfect, and I wasn't really worried about it, but just having that extra little bracing gave me a little bit more confidence to get up on the scaffolding behind this 1,500-pound wall that was leaning toward me. Now you can see that 2x4 on the wall jack on the right, I've moved up about 4 or 5 feet, and I did the same thing with the one on the left, and that was to account for the fact that the wall is taller than a 16-foot 2x4 would allow for on the jack. And there you can see the wall falling into place right there. And now that the wall's up, all I need to do is double check the bottom plate, make sure that it's straight and that it's where I want it to be, and then nail it into place. I use the existing wall on the right there to plumb up this side of the wall, and then if we go around, we can see from the other side that the wall is lining up nicely with all of the bracing we put in. I also have this diagonal piece of bracing, which is helpful if you have another wall that you can do that with, but this was more than enough to keep up. I should probably have had a safety rope or something at the top, but I just didn't have much concern. Once that wall gets up at the top, there's just not much weight to it. All of the weight is downward at that point, so the last few inches of swing as that wall plops into place isn't too problematic. But that's where I'm at. Thanks for watching. See you next time.